Johnny Carson revealed the 9 Golden Age guests who were actually evil. And the truth is far darker than anyone watching The Tonight Show ever suspected. For 3 decades, Carson greeted America with a charming grin and a voice as smooth as midnight jazz. But behind that smile was a man taking mental notes, cataloging the monsters who stepped onto his stage wearing Hollywood polish like armor. According to longtime insiders, Carson carried a private list, names he despised, people he considered dangerous, manipulative, cruel, or downright predatory, guests he treated politely on camera, but whispered warnings about the moment the commercial break cut in. The first was the glamorous icon who audiences adored, but whose venom backstage was so icy it made staff members avoid her hallway. Carson once said, talking to her felt like shaking hands with a cobra covered in diamonds. Then came the legendary crooner, whose voice melted radios across America, but whose entourage stormed the studio like hired muscle, creating tension so thick even the cameramen kept their eyes down. Carson quietly admitted he'd never seen anyone wield fame as a weapon, the way that star did. The third was the so-called genius director, who behaved like every rule of television was beneath him, walking into the studio as if he owned it, tearing up writers' notes, redirecting camera operators mid-show, and refusing to end a segment, no matter how many cues Carson gave. Afterward, Johnny muttered that brilliance was no excuse for bulldozing everyone around you. The fourth was the aging Hollywood titan, whose charm vanished the second the red light went off. A woman who turned every conversation into an interrogation and shredded staff morale with her trademark cruelty. Carson once joked she didn't need a script, she needed a warning label. Number 5 was the former child star who charged into the studio like chaos on 2 feet, invading women's personal space, ignoring boundaries, and stumbling through stories no one could decipher, leaving Carson privately furious and forcing the producers to rethink ever booking him again. The 6th was the sparkling European diva, whose demands could fill a small novel. Temperature requirements, custom lighting, imported cosmetics, forbidden colors, banned guests, and every time she visited, the entire Tonight Show schedule collapsed under the weight of her dramatics. Carson once said he'd rather interview a houseplant. Number 7 was the Oscar-winning firebomb, who treated every appearance like a battleground, derailing light-hearted comedy with explosive rants, sudden mood swings, and unpredictable outbursts that left Johnny gripping his desk and praying for the commercial break. Even he admitted she meant well, but the chaos was relentless. The 8th was the once-beloved bombshell whose political views were so extreme they left staff shaken, and whose backstage comments about LGBTQ employees disgusted Carson to the point where he personally vetoed future bookings, an extremely rare move from a man who prided himself on professionalism. And finally, the 9th name, the one Carson reportedly hated most, the comedian hailed as a national treasure, a man of the people, a humanitarian on camera, and a relentless bully off it. He hijacked segments, mocked staff, insulted Carson to his face, and unleashed tirades over trivial mistakes. When he adjusted Johnny's tie on live television as a power play, the host nearly snapped. After that appearance, Carson reportedly said, "In a city built on fake smiles, he's the fakest I've ever seen." And from that day forward, the comedian was quietly banned. Carson's secret blacklist wasn't gossip. It was a map of Hollywood's real dark corners, proof that fame can hide monstrous behavior, and that some legends wore their charm like a mask. More shocking is that most viewers never suspected a thing. They saw laughter, glamour, movie magic, but Carson saw the truth every night. If these revelations stunned you, buckle up, because the next story dives into the sitcom Sweetheart, whose adorable persona hid violent outbursts, so extreme producers installed panic buttons on set. Subscribe so you don't miss the bombshell. And the story doesn't end there, because after Carson's private blacklist leaked among a few trusted insiders, more buried truths began to surface, revealing just how deep the rot ran in the polished world of Golden Age entertainment. And suddenly, the quiet whispers that floated around NBC's hallways became full-blown accounts of what Carson personally experienced, tolerated, and even survived, just to maintain the illusion of a smooth, effortless late-night show. Producers who had stayed silent for decades finally admitted that some guests were so toxic that Carson would walk off set and retreat to his dressing room in complete silence, letting the makeup artists and assistants decode his mood by the intensity of his stare alone. And one of them recalled a night when Carson slammed the door so hard the walls shook after interviewing a revered Hollywood novelist who had spent the entire break insulting junior staff, mocking their accents, and belittling their dreams. And Johnny said afterward that the man's charm was like perfume sprayed on rotten meat. There was also the infamous choreographer, adored by millions for her elegance, who turned vicious behind the curtain, tearing into Carson for asking a harmless question, then demanding the studio remove every female stagehand before she entered because she believed they disrupted her aura, pushing Carson to remark privately that talent means nothing when someone's spirit feels poisoned. And then came the aging sitcom patriarch, the one America saw as a gentle father figure. But the Tonight Show crew remembered him for arriving drunk, grabbing staff members aggressively, and delivering a performance so sloppy that Carson spent the entire interview steering him like a runaway boat. When the cameras cut, Johnny whispered, "Never again," and the producers echoed the sentiment like a prayer. But perhaps the most frightening presence was a legendary playwright whose rage simmered like boiling water. Before his interview, he berated a cue card assistant until she cried, then stormed onto the set and refused to speak until the studio temperature was lowered to a degree so cold the audience complained. And Carson later admitted that the man's silence felt more threatening than any rant. Even more unsettling was the glamorous heartthrob whose fans worshipped him, but whose ego was so colossal he brought a full security detail to prevent anyone from looking him in the eyes, ordering staff to turn around as he passed. Carson endured the interview politely, but afterward he joked that his guest needed therapy, not applause. And then there was the dramatic actress whose superstition bordered on madness. She demanded that anyone who spoke to her backstage first knock 3 times, step back twice, and never say the word Thursday. So when Carson accidentally mentioned the day during the interview, she froze, glared at him, and later accused him of trying to curse her career. Johnny merely rubbed his temples and said dealing with her felt like babysitting a ghost. Even the musicians brought chaos, like the legendary guitar rebel who refused to tune his instrument, insisting that imperfection is art, and spent the commercial break yelling at his manager until Carson leaned over to a producer and muttered, "I thought rock stars slept, but apparently they scream instead. But nothing compared to the puppet master producer, an industry titan who controlled careers with a whisper and walked into the studio acting like everyone was beneath him. He rearranged chairs, rewrote jokes, insulted Carson's monologue, and treated the cameramen like servants. And when the interview finished, Johnny calmly said, "That man is proof that power is a disease." And the crew never forgot it. As the years passed, Carson started recognizing the patterns. The bigger the ego, the more violent the entitlement, the more twisted the personality behind the glittering Hollywood persona, and he grew sharper at spotting the warning signs: fake laughter, overly polished charisma, stories rehearsed to sound spontaneous, hands that shook from anger rather than nerves. Eventually, Carson's private list evolved into his own internal moral compass, guiding who he tolerated and who he quietly blocked from ever returning. And staff would watch him scan a guest's name and sigh, already predicting the storm that was about to hit the studio. And the craziest part is that the public never knew, because Carson protected them from the ugliness, swallowing the discomfort, smoothing over chaos, and still giving audiences the warm, familiar Tonight Show magic they adored. He once told a close friend that the real job of a late-night host wasn't to entertain. It was to survive the personalities who pretended to be stars, but behaved like villains. And as more secrets come to light, the next revelation is even darker. One Golden Age legend, adored by millions, left such a terrifying impression on Carson that he changed the entire structure of The Tonight Show just to avoid ever sitting alone with him again. And that story is the one that truly exposes the nightmare behind old Hollywood. If you're ready for that bombshell, stay close, because the truth gets even uglier. And even after all those chaotic guests, Carson knew the darkest revelation was still ahead, because one Golden Age superstar rattled him so deeply that he quietly changed studio protocol just to avoid being cornered alone again. A man whose charm on camera hid something cold and predatory behind the eyes. And Carson warned producers never to leave him unsupervised, proving that even in Hollywood's brightest era, some legends carried shadows bigger than their fame.